how should we be thinking about love, the word love? Is there a definition that applies to everyone? Is it more of a verb
I'm
or
more, yeah, like I'm the believer that love is a verb. It's something that I think it's both something that you do and something that you are. And I'm a romantic, like I'm a romantic. I love love. I love my friends. I love my community. I love my people. Like I am your best friend. Like we just met and we'll go deep, I love conversations with people. I love to observe. I'm like an anthropologist, I just love. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know that I'd give people a full definition of it. One of the things that came up a lot during the titling of the book, titling of my podcast, is like, what is radical love? And it's like radical, the word radical stems from the root word root, right? To like, it's the root system.
Mm.
And if you think of a root system as this tapestry that connects everything and everyone, to be radical and to be radically loved, it's like a love that is unconditional.
Mm.
And it's hard to have that unconditional love, like even in our families sometimes. I grew up in a system where I didn't always get unconditional love. I got conditional love. And so I wanted to build a world and a space where that love is just present. And I think in our world, in the world of spirituality, wellness, whatever you want to see it, it's like, it's a beautiful fertile ground to practice that type of acceptance and that type of unconditional love, which again is hard, but the intention is there. And to me, it's like when you approach meditation, there's an intention, there's a practice, there's an integration. So I think love is the same thing, right? It's the same way we go into a new space, a new relationship.
Mm-hmm. And finally, just because you mentioned metrics and how to gauge success, how are you defining success overall at this stage in your life, having done all the things you've done and seen all the things you've seen?
I mean, do you want like the I'm doing a podcast answer, or do you want like my personal answer? Because
No,
there's
your
two
personal
different.
answer.
They're
Your
two
like
different.
your personal 10,000-foot view answer of success.
I mean, I merit success as being in a state of peace. That to me is success. When I'm at peace, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing, what I'm creating, what the next thing is, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And it's like, oh, this is the next thing. This is the next opportunity. I think for many years, I merited my success on acquiring accomplishments. Like, oh, I did this, or I got to this episode, or now I have a million downloads, or now I have, got a book deal, and now I, got this like epic teaching job, and now I'm working with this celebrity, or now I'm working. It's like that to me doesn't fill my heart. It doesn't make my heart full. I think about the things that make my heart full. I'm like, oh, just spending time with the people that I love, having great conversation, playing with my dogs, raising butterflies, reading books, drinking tea, watching the sunset, watching the sunrise. Those moments of just pure bliss like more bliss, more, you know, those moments, those true moments of, you know, being in that state. You know, it's like, I think this is where knowing where to look comes in, because when I read it, like, I think, and you can, I don't know if you remember this or not, but like, obviously it came out during COVID, right? Like, so we were kind of having this full on, not knowing what was going on in the world. But I think I read that at a time during this transition in 2020. I kind of used it as my opportunity to retire from teaching yoga. And I just felt I was truthfully really burnt out. I'd been traveling. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but I was doing like 4 retreats a year. I was doing teacher training. I was just like, it was a lot, and I was just done. And I think that year, it was just like, I felt like I needed a hard reset. I needed to figure out like what I wanted to do, because I felt like my life has now, as an entrepreneur, you know this, right? You built this system that's like, as an entrepreneur, self-employed person, then it kind of grows its own little legs and arms and head. And then all of a sudden it's just this entity that's just navigating the world. And you're like, oh shit, now this thing is happening. And now I'm like responsible for this thing. And it's kind of going all over the place, and I'm still responsible for it. And now it's in charge, and now I'm not in charge. And I think I was having one of those sort of existential moments where I felt like I really needed to shift where my attention and where my energy was going. And I mean, I just loved reading some of those stories you wrote in there. The Wanderlust one, where you're like driving and it was like this experience. I don't know if I wasn't there. I didn't go to that one, but I know you were teaching, and I'm just like, man, like the answers are just all around us, right? They're just all around us all the time. And it really helped shift my perspective. I mean, truly. And I was like, okay, so how do I merit success now if it's not the standard way people see, oh, I got to win this award, or I have to do this, or I have to accomplish this, or I have to make X amount of dollars, or I have to buy a house, and I have to, you know. And then you took off on your like sabbatical where you're like, I'm getting rid of everything, I'm leaving. And I'm like, wait, what? I mean, he's really doing the thing. Like, he's not messing around, you know? And I think that also, seeing people like yourself, other friends of mine that really just committed to following that path and committed to living this life, this practice of non-attachment. Like, these things around me don't define who I am. And so this is a long answer to how I view success, but I guess to me, like, success is just an ability to feel at peace and accept where you are, I think.
Beautiful. What was the pub date for You Are Radically Loved?
Oh, the pub date was 2/22/22.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Are you into numerology and all that? Or is
I
that just a big coincidence?
My inner Buddhist practices non-attachment, but my heart-centered astrologer says this absolutely means something. I mean, I don't know. I thought it was kind of a cool thing to have happen, although there was a little situation that happened during the publishing time, because some people thought it was 2/2/22, but the actual pub date was 2/22/22. So it was really interesting to just kind of experience that confusion with, you know, like launch dates and things like that. It was quite interesting, but I thought it was like, it's a good number. It felt lucky.
That was your first book, right?
Yes.
So you've been out for 1 year. What's like something? What's your favorite interview so far? You've done a lot of interviews. You conduct a lot of interviews. No, this is gonna be right up there. But I'm just curious, like, Which one is going to be second after we finish our interview?
Second after this interview. I've had such great conversations revolving around the content of the book, but I have to say, just going on what we were talking about earlier, I love asking questions. And I would say, God, it's hard.
You're thinking of one right now, but you're trying to think of another one. You're like,
yeah,
no,
yeah. I'm thinking of one. Well, I did one with one of my dearest, closest friends, Sahara Rose.
She's a good interviewer. Yeah.
She's a great interviewer. I mean, she's really great at what she does. And it's no surprise why she has amassed such success with her podcast, her platform. She really knows. She's one of the hardest working people I know, and she really has such deep wisdom and knowledge, and she's
so young too,
I
which
know.
is so impressive.
Right.
Can't believe how young she is. She's had so much life experience.
Yeah, she's lived many lives, and I would say that is up there for sure. With experiences. And to me, it's always so special when, like us, you have a relationship with somebody who, is interviewing you or has done some research about your content. It's always, to me, more relaxing, I guess, to answer questions as opposed to somebody who I've never met. And you go and you do these interviews with somebody who doesn't have any knowledge, which is also can be really interesting. But I think for me, just as a person, obviously it's a little bit more, I feel like we're just having a conversation and nobody else is listening. Right.
Beautiful. Shout out to Sahara Rose. Got to check out her stuff. All right, cool. You have described your childhood growing up in East LA as idyllic. There were barbecues, there were beach trips, there was music. So, and there was Catholicism.
Yeah. That thing.
So, growing up with two parents who were both born in Mexico, first of all, what language was spoken in the house? I'm assuming Spanish, but I'm also wondering if they spoke good English or they had to learn, or were you the interpreter when people called?
Yeah. There was both, because my dad, Spanish was my first language, and Spanish was majority. It was the majority of our conversations were in Espanol, and my mom did go back to school when I was little, and she went to learn English. And so then my mom became fluent. She was also really young. She was still a teenager. So she was able to really integrate into learning the new language. And, but my dad just still fully understands English, but again, just for the purposes of my aunt, my uncles, and my grandmother, everybody spoke Spanish. So that was the language of the land.
I wonder, I mean, you mentioned that you were a good listener as a young person, as a 5 and 6-year-old. I wonder if that has anything to do with it, having to interpret or translate or figure out what people were actually saying.
Well, it was interesting because Spanish was my first language. And my dad always tells me this story that when I was little and my cousins would come over, a lot of my cousins, myself, my sisters, my older sister were born here. So my older sister, since the age I can remember, spoke both languages. And my dad said that I would always, anytime we would have family gatherings, I would always come crying to him, asking him like what they were saying, because I didn't understand what they were saying because they were speaking English. And so I had a hard time learning English, I think, because I
There weren't
remembered,
enough conjugations for you, so you were
yeah,
confused.
I
You're like,
was
wait a
like, what
minute,
is
is it masculine?
happening? I'm
Is it
like,
feminine? What's going on
¿qué pasa? So yeah, so it was tough for me as a kid, but then as I got older, yeah, you become the translator of languages forever. And my grandmother was the one that took us to school, and she didn't speak not even a tad tiny bit of English. So it was always trying to figure out how to tell her what the teacher was saying, and the translation. There was a lot of there was a big number of Asian communities in this specific area where our elementary school was. So there were many different languages, and learning the difference again at a young age between Vietnamese, Chinese, or Vietnamese, Mandarin. Um, uh, it was just such a interesting experience to be able to understand that there were different languages that people spoke.
Yeah.
And to me, it just became normal to be able to speak different languages, right? To be able to speak English, and it was always English and Vietnamese, English and Mandarin, English and Spanish, English and Russian. It was kind of I don't know. I'm really grateful to have had that experience, because again, it taught me how to be really attentive to what people were saying, because even if I couldn't understand the language, I could always try to intuit what was happening.
Right.
And I think that's a way that we integrate learning any language, or learning even emotional language from people,
Yeah.
right? Like just being attentive.
You were a prolific writer. You had one of those diaries with a lock on it, and you journal. Were you writing in Spanish, or you were writing in English?
I mean, in kindergarten, there's both. I have
Because if you
both.
don't want anybody reading it, obviously you would write in English, because
Right.
nobody in the
Yeah,
house
exactly.
spoke
And there were
English.
plenty of times where I got in trouble for some of the things that I would write. Like I would, talk shit about my parents or something, and my mom would find it, and I'd get in trouble, and I'd be mad because they didn't let me go outside and play or something. And my writing got me in trouble at a young age.
Yeah. Was there any foreshadow? I know we're going to talk later about how your mom gave you this book that really changed the course of your life. But as a young person, was there any foreshadowing for that? Was she like a spiritual person, or was she just open to those kinds of things when you
My
were
no,
younger?
my mom wasn't really around. And
Mhm.
neither of my parents were really around when I was
You were
young.
latchkey.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, my grandma was the one. My little abuelita was the one that,
Abuelita.
yeah, my little abuelita was the one. She took care of us. My parents worked long hours, and so they weren't really around. But there was a time later on when I think my mom, at that time in her life, having kids so
Mhm.
young, my older sister and I as a teenager, where she was going through this sort of self-discovery phase. And I think it happened at the perfect time because of what was happening in our lives. Her being open to, I think, anything that would work was
Mhm.
really the key for me to be able to see what was possible for my life.
Well, what were some of their life philosophies? Mentioned they worked hard. Did they talk about that? Like, you have to work hard. We're immigrants.
Yeah,
Can never take anything for granted.
yeah, my dad would always talk about, I learned compassion at a really young age, because my dad would just tell me these awful stories that, again, as a child, you don't really want to hear about your dad going hungry and not having food to eat, and growing up in a shanty with dirt floors and having to work as like child labor because they had nothing. And hearing my grandmother talk about, yeah, just really horrific things that happened in their little ranch or village, how they would have to survive, how, my dad would go days without eating, and he only went to school up until the fourth grade because my dad only went to school up until the fourth grade because there he had to start working at 10. I mean, if you can imagine, he's telling me the story and I'm like, oh, I can't even imagine having a job. You're a kid, right? Like not being able to go to school because you have to work to help feed your family. So these stories would come up as a way for him to teach us that everything that we have to be grateful for everything that we have, even though we didn't have much. We always really appreciated any toy we would have or any piece of clothing. Or I had this thing with my shoes, I think because my dad would talk about having to walk for miles without shoes, and he would get to school and sometimes the kids would make fun of him because he wasn't wearing shoes to school. And I remember those things really impacted me and made me realize that there are other worlds, places where people don't have what I have, and I have to really be appreciative of what I have and make the best with what I have. And so I think my dad's philosophy was always one of equality. And the reason why it was the equality point or philosophy was because he knew that we would grow up in a place where maybe we didn't have the things that other people had. And he always instilled this idea that the sun comes up for everybody, right? Like the sun shines on everybody equally. So don't ever feel like you're inferior from someone because of either you don't have enough resources, or you don't look like everybody else, or you don't speak the same language as everybody else. He said, just remember, everybody's the same. Like humans, we're all the same. And I think for him, he was such a heart-centered because he's still here. He's such a heart-centered, emotionally connected man. And I've always appreciated that about him. He's always been honest with me. He's always told me things almost to a fault of too much honesty. But I've always appreciated his softness because he has always had softness. And don't get me wrong, I mean, my dad is a functioning alcoholic. There are issues and there are so many, there's so much history in our things that have happened in our relationship that, are sort of cringe. But at the end of the day, like, to answer your question, I think those lessons were so vital to the person that I became. And with regard to my mom, I think there wasn't so much interaction. There wasn't so much of this sort of philosophical interaction, other than her big sort of driving point was always to be humble and not ever allow anybody to humiliate you. That was a big thing for her, to sort of have grace and to work hard and to just stay on course. And that has been her motto. I mean, this woman came from a family of 16 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Yeah. So, she had this very sort of rigid way of being. I always told people that my mom had more of the male masculine traits, and my dad was always the artist. He was a singer, and he was all about emotions and being expressive and being this artist. And it was interesting to have that dichotomy, I think.
So when you grew up in East LA, did it feel very separate from what people imagine LA? Like, did you guys associate it with when you would see movies? Oh, this is actually in LA, or did it seem like a faraway place, even though you were still in the same relative vicinity? You know, Beverly Hills and all these other areas,
Oh,
Hollywood.
come on. Like, of course, this is like East LA. You go anywhere East LA, you are in a completely different world. I mean, even now, now it's like all of those Silver Lake Echo Park areas that you couldn't go to as a kid are now $1 million homes. That's a separate thing. But back in the day, I mean, you just did not. There were certain areas you just would never go to. And when I was little, it hadn't become overrun with gangs and violence yet. It took a little bit of time. I would say early 90s is when it started to really kind of change, where we weren't allowed to go play outside anymore. We wouldn't go on nightly walks. We would sort of pick and choose when we would leave our neighborhood. And
your abuelita used to wonder why you wore black all the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And this was actually, I was just talking about this earlier today with my sister-in-law, because we were talking about what our identity was as a young child and, or a teenager. And we were talking about, you have all these different sects of kids. You got the skater kids, you got the punk rock kids, you got the preppy kids. And I was a misfit. I was, I wore all black all the time because this was my way of staying safe. When you live in a border neighborhood where there are two different gang affiliated colors on each side, and somebody can just decide that what you're wearing is the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood. And that can cost you your life. And many times it did to a lot of people. And it's such a nuanced experience when you grow up in an area where gang violence is so prevalent, and it just becomes such a normal thing where you don't really think about it. There's a point in your life when you're growing up in a neighborhood like the one that we grew up, where you have to decide which side of the fence you're on. And for some, if you don't live on the side of the fence that you've chosen, you're essentially in danger 24/7.
So right? Even women, I know guys are definitely in danger if they wear certain colors, but women too?
Yeah, it was, of course, like there was so many. Yeah, because you think you're in a neighborhood where women, girls, your uncles, your brothers are gang affiliated. And so what do you do to be a part of your family? You become gang affiliated yourself. And it just, the template repeats itself, whether you're a boy or a girl. Yeah, it made no difference.
So when you were about 15, you had these two childhood friends who died in this freak flash flood accident. And this is the year before you were arrested. And I'm just curious if there was a connection there between your relationship with God. Were you like, F it, I'm just gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna live tomorrow, or did it have an effect? And if so, what was that effect?
Yeah, by the way, you're the first person who's brought up the connection between the two. So thank you for being.
Well, you don't mention the flash flood to the end of the book, so maybe the other people don't get to the end.
They don't get to the end. They don't find that little Easter egg. But the fact that you did, that's awesome. Thank you for getting there. There was a group of 5 of us in kindergarten. We had our little crew of gals. And so these 2 friends that Gigi and my friend Dulce, her brother also passed away in that flash flood. There was 5 kids that died. Mm-hmm. And 2 of them were my good friends. And one of the boys was my friend Dulce's older brother. and then there was two others that passed as well, but we were just so close. We went to elementary school, junior high together, and unfortunately we had to split ways during high school because our districts were just in two different places. And so actually the truth is we were in the same district, but my mom just wanted to get me away from, I'm going to do air quotes, the bad kids, and wanted to put me in a different school district. And somehow she was able to pull it off. I think in a desperate attempt, she saw the writing on the wall. You know, she could see that I was just on this path. And I think about it a lot. And what happened essentially, and I tell the story in the book, we all often would gather and we would still do our same little stroll to the bus stop, and then we would part ways. At times we would ditch school together and go and smoke some pot at the Wash, which is this like channel of the LA River where the runoff of water goes whenever it rains. And we had a severe storm that year. It was El Nino storm. And we had, gathered as normal. And there was this, you know, I'm trying to remember exactly like what happened that day. And oh yeah, I had been in trouble. Right. And I'm like, what happened? Because that day I had been in trouble or I was grounded, and my mom didn't let me walk to school. She wanted to drive me to school to make sure that I went to school. So she had to do this thing where she would get to work late. Can you imagine also being a single mother and having to like figure out your work schedule so that you can drive your misbehaving child to school, so that you can make sure that she was going to school so that she stays safe, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, I have so much compassion for her now. And so she drove me that day, and they ended up ditching school and went down to the Wash, and this water came and it washed them out, and they all drowned during this flood, and it was all over the news. It was a big thing. And it was part of this experience at that point where there was a lot of people that we had known that had passed away, drive-by shootings or gang affiliated deaths, drunk driving accidents. I mean, death was at that time in my life felt like it was just so prevalent. It was everywhere. Mm-hmm. And this, though, I think hit different because these were people that I grew up with. I talked to. It was somebody that was here. And I think that's sort of where that connection came in later on, where, I just wanted to hit the F it button and say, what is the purpose of all, like, what is literally having an existential crisis in that moment, thinking, if this whole God thing is real, why does this happen to like two of the most amazing, beautiful human beings that have ever walked this earth, that were good? I mean, these girls were good girls, the occasional ditching school, whatever, but they still got good grades, still showed up, and then this happens, right? So the connection then comes later on, as you said. This is the story at the end of the book, and it just gives people some insight as to, now going back to the beginning of the story, where I get these moments of catastrophizing moments in my life because I know that the other shoe can drop in any moment. And also that having this unprocessed emotion created my desire to like be Rage Against the Machine, right? And just say, nothing matters. All of this there's no point to it. So why not just do whatever I feel like doing, because we're only here for a short amount of time.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the cop car incident. Oh, actually, before we talk about that, what were your career aspirations after that incident happened, the death of your friends? Did you envision what you would want to be when you grew up? Did you think you wouldn't grow up?
My plan was to, I don't know why Brazil, but my plan was to just move to Brazil and go live in the Amazon. That was my plan.
Okay.
Why? I have no idea. I had no connection. My aunt had a Brazilian best friend, but there was no other connection other than there are trees and there's forest and you can get lost in there. And that's where I want to go. That was it.
Okay.
Interesting, right?
Okay. So then the next year you're up to no good. You're hanging out, ditching school. And then you're in this park with your friends. What happens?
I'm at the park with my friends and I'm fully sober. I always say that to people because I wish I had the excuse of not being sober so that it would explain my completely void of intelligence answer to whatever was happening at the time. We're at this local park by my school, high school, and there was a bunch of kids hanging out. There happens to be a police car. I don't want to say chase, but I didn't see the chase happen, but they apparently had been pursuing this vehicle, this red Honda Prelude. They pursued it to the park. The guys got out. The police officers got out. They pursued on foot, allegedly. And I show up with my friend, and everybody that's at the park is basically telling me to go get in the cop car because why not? There is no reason why I shouldn't. Right?
It was an undercover car though, right? It wasn't.
It was an undercover. Yeah. It was an undercover, but it still had all the,
okay,
clearly a police vehicle. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I had no idea. I mean, it was
right,
very clear. So I get in and start like pushing buttons. I put the seatbelt on because at least, wow, I had that much conscious awareness. And I put the seatbelt on. I turn the car on, and then the black and whites show up around. It felt like it was just like a swarm. I couldn't tell you right now how many there were, but there was a lot.
This was crawling with undercover cops.
Oh yeah, everywhere. Crawling. And they come out. I get out really quickly, and I think I start moving too quickly where the police officers have their guns drawn, and I'm wearing, the scene is just unreal. I'm wearing all black, my uniform, black hoodie, and I'm wearing these like fingerless cut off panda gloves, like from Hot Topic or something. And, they're telling me to put my hands up, and I'm looking around scanning for who they're talking to because I'm still in disbelief that these people are coming for me. And because I didn't do anything. I was just sitting in a car. I wasn't doing it.
Also, look, this is going to sound sexist what I'm about to say, so you'll forgive me, but you're a very beautiful woman now. I'm sure at 15, you were like a really pretty little young girl.
No, I mean, thank you. That's so sweet.
And
I had like I had short black hair. My hood was on most of the time. So
still, you're 15, you're a kid. I can't believe they took it so seriously and arrested you and brought you in and all these things rough. For a 15-year-old girl.
Oh yeah. Oh, they roughed me up. I was on the floor.
I mean, if you had tattoos on your face and all that, that'd be enough. And but I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, they didn't care. They did not care. They were, And also like it was the Monterey Park PD. So part of me was just like, really guys, this is your excitement because you're, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm like, I'm going to strike that because I do know some Monterey Park PD people. But yeah, it was definitely extra. But again, growing up, seeing a scene like this, I knew how they treated my uncles, my cousins, and, other people, other neighborhood. You just knew, it was, the LAPD has a reputation because they have a reputation. It's not for no reason. So I was freaked out because I just, regardless of how I looked, I was being treated just like everybody else. So, and that was no surprise to me at all. And they cuffed me and they put me in the back of the police car and they drove me down to the police station. And that was it. I mean, I'm like, this is it. I had a record at that point already.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if this was it, if I was going to the shoe, if I was going to juvie, or the shoe actually is probably where I would have gone, or East Lake juvenile detention facility. But I was just kind of succumb to this idea that this is just what was happening now. And
how scared were you, or were you not scared at all? Were you just kind of like, okay, whatever?
I was a little bit indifferent, and also I was a little bit apathetic to the whole thing. I think I was more scared of my parents, what they would do. I knew that my mom, from the last time I had been arrested and she had come to bail me out, she said that if it happened again, to not call her because she won't come get me. So I called my dad because I knew he would do anything for me.
You called your dad.
I called my dad. He was at work and I felt so bad, and he left work, and I knew he would at least come bail me out. But in that holding cell is where, while I was getting booked, where the officer said to me, as he's booking me, kind of making fun of me, right? Being sort of snide and a little bit, like poking fun. I go back to that humiliating thing that my mom has always been so afraid of us experiencing, like, don't ever let anybody humiliate you. And I think that was a moment where I felt a little tad bit of shame, but also I had to keep this facade of, well, if I do go to juvie, I need to be tough because I've heard what it's like in there, and I can't show emotion, and I can't pretend, I can't be scared, right? I have to put on a brave face. And that's when the booking officer basically kind of smirked and, in the snarkiest way, basically said to me, welcome to life in the system. And I just remember feeling so angry at that. And I think that was actually the moment where I felt some emotion. And I just felt this internal no that yelled no. And I can't really describe what happened in that moment, other than it just felt kind of out of body experience. This, I guess you could call it intuition, this sort of intuitive inner knowing that just said, no, this is not happening. I'm not going to be part of the system. This is not my life. And that was the first time I ever felt like I could make a different choice. I could have a different life. I could have a different experience, because up until that point, I had never even known that was possible. It just felt like this life was just an experience, and we're here and then we're not here. And that's all that there is. But there was in that moment this feeling of, oh, I have to go through this for some reason. I can't really tell you why or how, but this is not my life. Like, this is not where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, spoiler alert, you got a lucky break. The judge only gave you 6 months of probation. What does that mean? You can't do certain things. You just can't get in trouble again.
Let me tell you, it sucks. I mean, it ended up being a year, because after the 6, so basically when you're on probation as a teenager, depending on what your background or what your, like what your record is, I basically wasn't at a curfew. So I couldn't be out without adult supervision, and adult meaning one of my parents, after 6 p.m. I couldn't leave LA County. I don't think I could leave LA County or the state. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I had to do 100 hours of community service.
Mm-hmm.
And there was thousands of dollars in restitution from the damage I had done to the vehicle. I had to go to anger management. I had to go to therapy. My parents had to go to parenting classes.
Now I see why you had all that anxiety.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, there was just like a lot of hoops that my parents had to go through, and at the end of the day, I mean, all of it introduced me to therapy. It introduced me to hard doing the work. Those 100 hours of community service I did, and I write about it in the book. I did them at the public library, and it really opened my eyes and my world substantially. And I did every single minute of those 100 hours. And you know what sucks is that so many of my friends that have, because this is a standard thing. All of my friends at some point had been on probation, had been to juvie, or were on their way. So everybody knew these tricks to, get this community service, or I hope you get this probation PO. Like, I hope you get this. Oh, make sure you go to the, this courthouse and have your public defender make a request to go to this and get this person, just like there's all this intel, right? As a teenager,
street law tactics.
Yeah, totally. And what's funny, I've not ever talked about that before, but you kind of get all this intel. And I remember one of my friends saying, oh, you should go do your community service at the library, because the manager at the library kind of hooks you up on the time. I mean, that he will write extra hours on there. So you'll do your 100 hours like in no time. And think about it. I could only do my community service after school, and I would get out of school at 3:30. By the time I'd get to the library, it was 4. I could only be there for 2 hours because I had a curfew at 6. So I was doing these little incremental 90 minutes, if I was lucky, 45 minutes. And the manager that had been at that library before was gone. And so the lady that was there now wrote down to the second. I mean, I did that 100 hour. It's like been how many years now? And
you got some hours left.
I know.
You got to get off this interview and go to the library.
Yeah, man, I am so, but it was great. Like I loved every, in the moment, it was brutal. It was hard to do that time. But at the end of the day, like, all the anger management, all the therapy, all the parenting classes, everything really did its duty. The reason why I ended up getting 6 more months was because my grades were still not, I think the judge was kind of a little harder on me because
he saw the potential in you, probably.
Yeah, he saw the potential, and he saw what I didn't understand was, if I'm doing better, why is he giving me 6 more months? I think it was the best thing that judge could do, because now I have a full year of being consistent. Having the consistency really helped shape this work ethic and this sort of civil etiquette that I had to learn in that process. And I'm so grateful that it did happen and that I was able to actually take from that experience. I think somebody asked me once what the hardest part of that process was. And I always go back to having to essentially change my entire friend base. I mean, these are people I grew up elementary school, kindergarten, and some of my cousins. So essentially I had to cut myself off from people who I was blood related to because I couldn't be around them. It was also against my probation to be affiliated with some of the people that I was around. But also it was, when teenagers or family members feel spurned by you, they don't always react in a great way, especially teenagers, when one of their best friends is now unable to talk to them and they're listening. So they thought that I would just continue on the path, right? On this, like hanging out with them and ditching and going to these house parties. And I didn't. I really followed the rules and essentially cut myself off from everyone for a year. And, it was a very nuanced dance that I had to do in high school because I was unable to now hang out with my friend base, but I also had to be able to get in trouble to get detention during recess so I wouldn't have to go hang out with them because they wanted to beat me up, and like, again, these are people also I'm related to, but it was sort of part of this feeling of rejection. I was rejecting them. And now somehow I thought I was better because I was distancing myself from my tribe. And so I think the hardest part wasn't all the, community service. It wasn't the jumping through hoops and having a curfew. It was cutting myself off from my people, my tribe, the people who I had grown up with. That was, I think, the hardest part to navigate.
Did you try to have a conversation with them, the closer ones, and say, look, I can't really, affiliate with you guys for a while, or you just ghosted them?
They weren't interested. I think the one and only time I tried to have the conversation was right after I'd received my sentence, telling everybody that I had to be good and I had to, they didn't do that. They essentially rejected the system and some of them ended up going to jail, or other worse things. But it was sort of the stance for the organism of our tribe, our people. Like, they rejected doing the work. So then I also needed to reject doing the work, because why would I think that I'm better than somebody else? And obviously that's not the case, but when you're a teenager, you don't know how. I didn't have a voice. I didn't know how to express myself. I was a people pleaser. I just, I'm the person that decided to not choose a color. I chose black. Like, I completely did my best to be on this neutral path, to not have to hurt anybody's feelings or put myself in danger,
You also had that cold shower moment, though, with the booking officer who said that to you. I don't know if you mentioned that to anybody at the time, or is that something that you reflected on as you were writing this book? Like, that was the moment. Has that been a story you've been telling for years, or is that something that you kind of reflected on?
That was definitely, I've only said it a couple of times when people have asked me, like, if there was a pinpoint moment. And that only came as a reflection in writing the book. I mean, a lot of this information I've not, it's not like, you know, I go into a yoga studio and start telling everybody like I had a criminal background, you know,
Although that's a good story to tell in a yoga class, though.
Right. Imagine it's like, just so you guys know, I've been arrested.
I'm a real
times.
spiritual gangster. You heard of that term?
Yeah.
Well,
well, right. Yeah, exactly. I remember seeing those t-shirts and thinking like, wow, really? Like, let me tell you something. Like I don't know that you want to, you know, mess with real gangbangers. Cause if you knew real gangbangers were like, I don't know what you'd be doing. I mean, now,
calling
whatever.
yourself a gangster.
Yeah. I'm like, I wouldn't be saying.
Well, the library was a foreshadowing to your yoga career because that's something that you started. That's how you started doing your yoga. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, let's talk about the bus system in Los Angeles. So you were used to taking. What was the bus you took most often? Which number?
I think it was. I want to say it was like the 23 line. I think it was like the 23 or 18. I can't remember, 18 or 23. It's been so long. And I took that bus I started taking the bus in the 6th grade.
Yeah. And that was kind of like your meditation as a young person, because you get to listen to music, you get to like have a little break from everything. And so going from East Los Angeles, let's talk about this first. Your mom drops this book off on your. I remember when I read that, I thought about a moment. My dad came in. My brothers and I were all watching television. I was 15 years old. That was the age that you were when this thing happened to you. He comes in from work and he puts a box of condoms on the television, on top of the television, and we're all looking at each other like. And then he just leaves. He doesn't say anything. We never even talked about like sex or anything like that. It was the weirdest little thing. Anyways, your mom comes home from work and she puts a Paramahansa Yogananda book in your bedroom for you. Yeah. What was your response
our bedroom,
to that?
We all shared a room. So we were all in the same room together. Let's be clear. Single mom. We had one room and we shared it, all of us. But this is how we would communicate. She would leave stuff on the bed or on the counter by the phone or something. And I was struggling with, I had these really bad anxiety attacks, and it came in these like waves where I would just be completely debilitated by this experience. And there was really no explanation. I was on medication at that point, and it didn't help. Like the medication didn't really do anything. It didn't stop me from, because when you have anxiety or you have panic attacks, you become so hyper vigilant and hyper aware of what's happening to your body, because you have this weird thing happen where your heart is beating in your palms and you have cotton mouth and you feel like you're, going to pass out or throw up or die, you become really hyper aware of anytime anything remotely close to that experience, any movement, any irregular heart palpitation, you go straight into panic. And so I was just having these moments of panic, and then they would randomly happen. I'd be at school and then I'd get into that agoraphobic state of not wanting to leave the room I was in because I thought something terrible was going to happen. And obviously years later, we diagnosed it with with PTSD. And obviously, like, growing up in an environment where there was violence and there was drive-by shootings and people were getting stabbed, and like this sort of traumatic environment that everybody else is in the same space, so you don't really know any better, any different, and it starts to manifest itself in different ways for different people. And for me, it was having these sporadic moments of panic attacks. And so a friend of my mom was working at the Children's Hospital in Hollywood, close to Vermont and Sunset Boulevard. And a friend of hers was the one that suggested I try meditation. She was a follower of Paramahansa Yogananda. She was part of the Self Realization Fellowship. And my mom had she did not know what it was. She just, a friend of hers at work said, she should try this, tell her to read this, to try meditation. It might help. And my dad had also gave me a book. Again, it's like, bless my dad, not speaking English, trying to do his own research to try and help me. It was this book called Don't Panic. And I read it from cover to cover. And every time I would get anxiety, I liked reading about the physiology of what was, because I wanted to know what was happening in my body. I'm like, okay, this is my sympathetic nervous system, and this is what this is, and this is why this is happening, and a thought is triggering this, and I'm okay. I need to do my breathing exercise. And so that had already started to happen in the background. My mom shows up with these pamphlets with this, who I thought was a lovely lady on the cover. I didn't know it was a gentleman. And I just started to read, and it felt very like woo. And at the time I didn't know what woo was. I only knew that, I knew about cults and different things because of stuff that we'd watch on the news, or, like my family would talk about or whatever. There was a couple of things that happened. Like, I don't know if you remember, there was like the Haley Bob. Do you remember the Hale Bob, the comet thing, the Hale Bob?
Yeah, the Nikes and all that.
Yeah. So I don't remember what year that was, but just like culty things were kind of like no-go zone, right? So that I already knew that cults were not good.
Mm-hmm.
And so aside from knowing that, I had no idea of new agey things other than horoscopes. There's this, and I'm sure you know this. I would hope that you know this. If you don't, we'll have a talk afterward. But do you know who Walter Mercado is?
That's I heard it in an interview you did. That's the Mexican psychic that you guys would watch on television.
Exactly. Walter was like, that was as woo as we went, right? It's like, oh, okay, whatever's happening, everybody has to stop to hear their horoscope for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So reading this book, it was like, you know how the literature, I mean, I don't know, you're familiar. I think you are, right? Yeah, you're familiar with Fellowship.
Oh yeah, of course. I used to go there all the time.
Yeah, I think
I've sat in those lectures that you, and that it couldn't have been further from where you were coming from, like East LA, and that scene, all these white people, and they're all dressed in robes.
Everybody's smiling. Like, why are you smiling?
Yeah, and it's so bright and sunny, and it's like white. The whole building is white, and it's just sparkling, and you have the lake, and it's really beautiful. If anybody listening to this goes to LA, you have to go to the Self-Realization Fellowship in the Pacific Palisades. Mm-hmm. So you show up, you turn up. I didn't go to bus.
I didn't. That's not the one I went. I went to there, but I went to Hollywood location. Yeah, which is same energy, same vibe.
Okay. Yeah, you said Sunset, and I just assumed it was Pacific Palisades, but the one in Hollywood is also the Sunset as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I went to the smaller one, and I had this really. It's so funny because I will call it a spiritual awakening, but really all it was me feeling my body breathing. Mm-hmm. Because up until that point, I had never felt safe in my body. Mm-hmm. That was just not my body was used to feeling anxiety and fear. And so I was used to just sort of going into disembodied experience. It's like, okay, I'm having this experience. I'm in fear with this person. Oh, we're having a robbery go on right now. Okay. Yep. We're just going to stand here and let them take what they're taking, and then they're going to leave, and then we're just going to continue. Mm-hmm. These experiences that, again, just create this trauma where it just didn't feel, I had never felt my body feel good, I guess. Mm-hmm. And in this moment, so I show up to this place, just like you said, you described the scene perfectly. I go into this meditation hall, and this lovely English woman is talking. She's just like having this talk. And I was just kind of looking around, waiting for the guy, whoever was going to get to show up and like do whatever the thing that is supposed to happen here. And I realized it was her, which I thought was cool. Cause I'm like, oh, I'm used to going to Catholic church. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was a really interesting experience. And she's talking about happiness and, you know, our responsibility to the pursuit of happiness and, you know, all of these things that felt interesting. I didn't understand fully what was happening, but then she guides us through this meditation where I talk about not wanting to close my eyes, and I had a really hard time doing eyes closed meditation. Obviously, for me, in my experience, it was challenging at first, but I remember just having this sense of, and it could have been the smell, like the incense or just the vibe. It felt the building felt safe to me, which was another thing. You know, you grow up scanning for exits, you grow up scanning for anybody who might cause trouble. When you're in a place where you feel like you can fully relax and somebody then is guiding you, telling you that you're in a safe place and you can relax, it just felt completely, it was bliss. Like I felt in complete bliss in that moment. And it wasn't because of a substance I was taking, and it wasn't because of any other reason other than my body just regulated itself. And then the mind, right? The mind, she is tricky. The minute I felt that surge of peace, the first thing I thought was, oh, this is going to end. How long is this going to last? Oh, okay. Wait, my heart's beating. Oh my God. Wait, am I having a panic attack? Am I going to have a panic attack? Am I going to have a panic attack the minute I walk out of this place? Like, you know, that thing that happens. I didn't have the mental training at that point, but that experience was I say that because it took still some time to really learn about mindfulness, learn about meditation, learn about yogic philosophy for me to really integrate it into my lifestyle. But that moment definitely showed me a pathway that I never even knew existed.
Mm. Did you go back much or not?
Yeah, years later, I went back, and oftentimes
but I mean, like in that time, did you go back?
Oh, in that time? Yeah, I went back a handful of times.
Did you come back to East LA and report, you know, hey guys, you won't believe what I just experienced?
Actually, I remember one of the times I came out, we went to the Bodhi tree. I went with a friend of mine because I was telling her about this crazy experience, and we went to the Bodhi tree. And
via bus,
we took the bus and we switched.
Those
we
are some
down.
long bus trips.
Dude,
that's like
so
an hour.
Long. So long, a lot of quarters, and we would look on the street to try and find dimes and pennies and whatever we could find, you know. And then there was a couple of times where we walked. Oh my God, we walked so far. Well, it felt so far, but back then it's like you just did what you did.
Did you ever go to Elixir across the street from Bodhi Tree?
Yeah, but that didn't open for a while. That was more like early 20s. I would go there, and yeah, I love that place. That Zen garden in the back. Light.
There's no place like that. I can't believe it's closed.
There isn't. Yeah, I would go and do a little meditation practice back there. I would just go and drink tea and bring my book and people watch. And I'm like, what is it like? I'm like, what is it like? Because I had a job at that point. I was full on career.
Yeah.
Job.
You were working as an assistant, right? Or something
well, at that point I was working at the salon. I was like salon managing, and it was right up the street because the salon was on Westbourne and Santa Monica Boulevard, right by the Trader Joe's. And Elixir was just like right down the street. So I would just sometimes walk down there because I didn't feel like finding parking. And it was like, oh, it was lovely. Oh my God, I love that you brought Elixir up. It's been They should bring that back.
I'm
Right?
sure if it was profitable, they would bring it back. Unfortunately, it's a bunch of 20-year-olds sitting around sipping tea all day long.
I know, right? Hello.
And they're paying $50,000 a month.
Oh, welcome to LA. And then there was like the little bookstore in the back, right? It was like a little bookstore. They had crystals
and little spa.
Yeah. Yeah.
So give us a little montage. Okay, so the next years you're learning yoga, you're working at the salon, you're assisting, you have a bit of an eating disorder, like
yeah.
you're running marathons. Are you living in LA at this point?
Yeah,
Or are
I'm
you
living
still
in LA. I'm living in LA. I'm trying to live my best life. And I was just so into spiritual growth and healing and learning. Yeah, learning different healing modalities. I had already started going to yoga classes back before it was Yoga Works Center for Yoga on Larchmont. That was my first yoga experience.
That's where I trained at the Center for Yoga.
It is?
I took Diane, what's her last names? She was the one that was doing all the trainings back in like 2002. Can't remember.
God.
But yeah, that's where I trained in yoga back in the day.
Back in the day, like we had to have crossed paths at some point back then, I would imagine. So yeah, so that became my life. You know, I was trying to live this. I just was really compelled by this life of balance because I was searching for peace. I was searching for balance because I still felt so much. Obviously, you know, I was in a really high stress job. The show, the salon at the time was doing a reality TV show. It was just like a mess. And, you know, I just met Tori. I was, you know, trying to finish college. I was just trying to do the most. And for no other reason other than it felt like I really needed to prove something to myself. And it was like when you feel so completely out of balance, you start seeking things that'll bring you back into balance, and you try and you start trying all kinds of different things on for size. And yeah, that was what was happening during that time. And, you know, I was still, you know, I was the person that would go party on the weekends and, you know, go get wasted and then like show up to yoga Monday morning, like ready to be vegan and clear and completely like doing the work, being on the path. And it actually took a couple of years. I had a lot of sober friends at that time that were in recovery, actively in recovery in AA. And my dad, I'd had experience with a lot of people in sobriety. So I was really drawn to people in sobriety because I experienced so many of these AA rooms when my dad would go through these bouts of sobriety, and I would go to these AA meetings and hear these like super graphic stories. But again, I'm such a good listener. I would sit there and just listen to these stories of people's lives. And so during this time I was hanging out a lot of my, you know, sober friends, and yeah, just not really thinking I had a problem or thinking that there was anything wrong with the way I was living my life. Also my desire to find balance. And I just slowly started to shift my life choices. You know, I decided after like my 22nd birthday or 21st or 22nd birthday that I didn't want to drink anymore, that I was just going to try being sober for a year. And that year turned into 2, then 3, then 4. And slowly my life just started to, I never personally considered that I had an issue with alcohol because I was never growing up in a family of alcoholics. Alcohol just was never my thing. I just never enjoyed it. It just was not something. I did it because, you know, it was a social thing. And when I would do it, I would always take it to the extra. So I'm like, oh, maybe it's something to look into. And so I just decided to stop. And it's interesting when these things happen in people's lives where we start to reflect on things that we think or consider might not be serving our highest good. And if you are open to finding balance, how you get opportunities to do that. And so I feel like the years that would come really allowed for me to thrive in choosing my health and my mental well-being. I went back to therapy. I started, I started my vegan venture shortly thereafter. And I just started to really go deep into my yogic studies. I did my first teacher training at Center for Yoga or Yoga Works during that time, and decided I really loved yoga, and I loved the world of wellness. It felt like putting my life and energy into something that was going to serve me and my highest good was a great way for me to live my life. And mostly what I wanted to do was, I saw how privileged I was in the aspect of being able to have access to going to therapy, going to yoga, even though, again, it was like I was the odd woman out, right? It still felt like this is something that everybody needs. This is something that I want to bring to my family, to the people, like the people I grew up with. And that was always my incentive to continuing to learn, because this wasn't, it wasn't as accessible, you know this, right? It wasn't as accessible as it is now. Back then, early 2000s, mid 2000s, it still was very, very much a privileged hobby for people.
It's where meditation is today. It's like, back then yoga was only practiced in these kinds of communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was like the montage. It just slowly, I always like to tell people this didn't happen overnight. It took many years, a lot of practice.
Yeah.
I started to see the benefits of living this sort of clean lifestyle. I loved the way I felt. I loved who I was when I was on this path, which is another thing I hadn't experienced. Obviously, having had an eating disorder, having had the PTSD, having had the panic, having sort of grown up in this environment, to get to this place of, oh, I accept who I am. I like the person I am. I like this kind and caring, compassionate person who cares about people and is actively trying to help others and trying to figure out ways to educate people in ways that they can help themselves. And so that's what I did, that just the path just started to open. You know how they say when you're on the right path, these synchronicities happen, these opportunities come into your life, and your life just starts to change. And it's absolutely true.
Was that flash flood that you were miraculously spared from because your mom dropped you off at school that day? Was that something that was still on your mind at that point as you were starting to identify your path and your purpose? Like, oh, this is why I that didn't happen to me, and I need to take this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, look, I thought about it back when I was a kid, and my dad would tell me how he would go to school without shoes on. Like I just felt like I have shoes. I get to go to school. Like I have an opportunity to make a change, even in the immediate people's lives that I have. It was, I think, for many years, I don't know. It's not that I had survivor's guilt or anything like that, because it's like, there is no knowing, but for many years, I would even say this to Tori, like, I shouldn't be here.
Mm.
Like there were so many instances in my life growing up, situations I put myself in as a 13 teenage year old girl, situations where you just don't, anything could have happened. Getting into cars with people that are driving erratically and are completely under the influence. Just things that
Dumb shit.
yeah, like just shit that you shouldn't be doing. And like
Right.
so many instances where I think back and I'm like, man, like I can't believe that I'm here, that this is my life, that I get to do this. So many people I know and knew aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I like to reflect on it not as a way to say, okay, yeah, this helps me keep going because I'm like some, warrior on this path. Like, no, I'm just like everybody else. I'm just, I don't know. I want to say I'm lucky, but I don't think I'm lucky. I really just believe that everybody has potential to choose a different life.
Yeah.
The potential, not the opportunity, the potential. And I think that's a big difference, because there are plenty of people with potential that'll never have the opportunity to move forward, because of their circumstances or where they live or political system, whatever.
Yeah.
But the potential is there.
I also loved how you reflected on that as motivation when you were in that marathon that was also happening during the worst rainstorm in race history, and that's what you really thought about that got you through your wall when you hit the wall. You said that your book, really, I don't know, your whole platform, really, your podcast, the radically loved brand, it started with a blog post. So
Yeah.
what I'm wondering is, you've been writing your whole life. Why did you start that blog post? Like, what was the inspiration? If you can remember, was there something, event that happened that said, I'm going to start a blog. I know I write, but people need to read what I've been writing.
Yeah. What's interesting is like, I don't really spend too much time reflecting on the whys. I just do. I just do shit, it's like, oh, this sounds good. But if I had to answer the question, I guess I spent so much of that, the beginning portion of my life in that rebellious state, feeling like we don't matter and I am insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't matter. And the world is a terrible place. I've seen some really gnarly shit happen to really good hearted people for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole everything happens for a reason, I stopped believing that as a really young person. And I think radically loved resonated with me because it's the path that I have to take myself. I have to believe the opposite. My work in this world, people sometimes think that I'm this like happy-go-lucky, optimistic, looking on the brighter, like the half is cup full person. And it's funny because I'm not that person. Like, I am the person that is not who I am at my core. I am the person that sees the reality of the world
Yeah.
and knows what people are capable of. And my work is to believe that the world will support me in my endeavors, because the only experience I have is the one I have, and I'm here, right? I'm still here. And I have to believe that the universe will support me and that the universe will provide that there is some sort of energy, essence, higher power, God, Mother Nature, whatever it is for people, I have to believe that there is something greater than myself that is going to be ever present. And sometimes for me, that anchor is change. Change is inevitable. You can always rely on change because she's always going to be there. Constant. And so I think that radical love, for me, the sort of tenets of you are radically loved, you are radically present, you are radically resilient, in a way, they are anchor points in my life that I have to believe in order for me to continue the work that I do and continue to live this life, right? It's like it's my purpose. My purpose is to feel radically loved, right? To be in that state of, it's not a state of like bliss or wholeness or contentment. These are the goals, right? They are the aspirations. But for me, it's just, to be radically loved is to be radically present. I don't know what's going to happen the next hour, the next day, the next year, but I do know that I'm here right now in this moment, in this time, and everything I need is right here, right now, in this perfect moment.
You're also early in the podcast game, earlier than most other people. And you're now 500 something episodes in. So I'm curious if someone, young woman from East LA reached out to you and said, "Hey, Rosie, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Do you have any advice, suggestions for me?"
Man. I would say,
what'd you say?
Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. I would say, I mean, if I wouldn't do it again. I mean, I would do it again, obviously, like I would, but I couldn't do what I do now. Like if I started my podcast right now, I just, it's like, look, we age, we get a little bit tired, and there has to be a driver there for you. I say, I'm a big fan of doing things because it makes your heart sing, because it makes your heart happy. Don't do things because you want to get 1 million downloads, or you want to make millions of dollars, or you want to achieve overnight success. Like that shit does not happen. If you want to do something because you're really excited about it, I don't want to say passionate, because I have like a sort of, that word occasionally bumps up against me, and I'm in a phase in my life where that word bumps up against me. So I'm going to use a desire, excitement, enthusiasm, and you're truly in your heart. It's making you lose sleep and making you forget to eat because you're just so super stoked. I say, girl, you get that podcast going. Like, don't care about what anybody else has to say. You get your podcast. Don't listen to anybody saying that there's too many podcasters. It's like super, what is it? Like, yeah, there's like an overabundance of podcasts,
Saturated market.
Yeah, exactly. That was the word. Mm-hmm. In my mind, I was speaking in Spanish, and I'm like, ¿cómo se dice saturated? Yeah, like I say, go for it, do what your heart sings. There's millions of books out there, but people still keep writing books, and people still keep reading them and buying them. So do it, if it's something that makes your heart sing. If you want to write a book, if you want to start a podcast, if you want to be a yoga teacher, if you want to be a meditation teacher because you think it's going to achieve XYZ, you have to go back and do some self-inquiry and really ask yourself what your motivations are. You know, I had to get really clear with what I wanted to create with my career, because I like to practice non-attachment. I really do. And I can feel those moments where I'm grasping at wanting an opportunity or some people could see my podcast and the platform I've built and think, wow, like, look how amazing you've been able to monetize, you've been able to build, and look at this community and look at what you've done. And that's great. But I can look at it also and say, but why am I not here now? I've been doing this for almost 7 years. Like, shouldn't I be up here instead of where I'm at? Like, that type of thinking is always a red flag for me, that says, okay, like, what's going on? Like, what's up? What's your motivations here? Like, what is it that you're actually trying to do? And so I think it's really important for us to be in that. I'm in a constant state of self-reflection. I mean, to a fault, you know, and I really try my best. And I say this with great humility, to practice what I preach. And it's not easy, but I would never do something that I would tell somebody else to do, or vice versa. So that's a great question. What about, I mean, you've been doing the podcast for a long time now. How do you feel about it? Would you do it again if you had to start right now in 2023?
I would. I'm absolutely 100%. Yeah. I think it's the best thing I've done. It's the hardest thing I've done recently, and it's the best thing I've done.
Yeah.
It's like, you know how writing a book, it can be hard.
Yeah.
It's like always writing a book. You always have a book that you're writing. There's no finish date to it. There are like periods where you have to go, you know, do a lot of work, and then periods where, like this, where we're having the conversation. That's just amazing, you know, and that makes it all worth it. But then the in between and the pre-production and the post-production, that's where it's just a grind, a weekly grind. But you know, it's totally worth it because I get to have these wonderful conversations, and I get to go deeper than the surface level with people that I admire and respect. And I think that in and of itself is just worth it, you know, and being able to add value, having someone listen to this conversation and being excited about you and your life and your work, and then go and look it up and listen to a dozen of your episodes, and, you know, just expands their understanding of things like love. Check this out. This is my next book that I'll be coming onto your podcast to talk about. Speaking of going on this nomadic adventure, I wrote a book about it.
I need to. Do you have a digital copy? What?
Yeah, of course I do.
Yeah, I'm stoked for you. Like, that's gonna be so rad. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah. So, anyways, we got to wrap this up.
Yeah, I'm like, we'll be here for another fucking 2 hours.
I know. But I want to thank you so much for sharing your story in the book, for sharing it on this podcast, and for just being a living, walking, talking example of what that intent listening is actually like, the listening that you displayed as a child. And you're still doing it. You're still doing it in your conversations, in your podcast. And it's like, you know, some people have to meditate. Some people are meditation. It's like what Salvador Dali said, I don't do drugs. I am drugs. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I love it. Oh.
You are meditation. You're walking, talking meditation. And it was an honor and pleasure connecting with you after such a long time. So looking forward to seeing you again at some point in person, and coming back onto Radically Loved and talking about travel light.
Yes, I can't wait. We have to do it in person because we got to do it in the studio now? Yeah.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.